right, thank you so much for being here on a Friday night after 2 weeks of fairs, late in the evening. It's nice to hear there will be a drink at the end. So I'll dive into it. The panel is called The Next Generation of Connoisseurs, Creating New Legacies for Collections. And I'm thrilled to be joined at my left by three people I've really admired for a long time who know just a ton about this, about the field of collecting, about connoisseurship. I'll introduce them, then do a quick intro, and we're going to jump into it. To my left is Eleanor Carey. She is an art advisor with the Carey Art Group, and for over 15 years, she's given specialized advice to a diverse group of dedicated collectors all over the world. She's an arbiter of taste and an authority on the art market, and widely respected as an advisor and collector. I would add to that, she has supported just an innumerable group of artists of my generation, younger and older, artists, dealers, remarkable people who are making art today have gotten vital support from Eleanor. To her left is Ebony L. Haynes. She's a senior director at David Zwirner, of course, the international enterprise, and she is also director of the 52 Walker Space down in Tribeca, where there's an Arthur Jaffa show up now. And next month, we'll be showing Diamond Stingley, one of the most amazing, interesting young artists working today. She's a writer and curator from Toronto. She's based in New York, and she's the co-curator of the 2024 Triennial at MoCA Toronto. She sits on the boards of Artist Space in New York and the New Art Dealers Alliance. She also runs Black Art Sessions, an online school that offers free professional practice classes to Black students worldwide. To Ebony's left, last but not least, is Adam Charlotte Hyman, who's the co-founder of Charlotte Hyman Herrero, which is an architecture and design practice out of New York and Los Angeles. He's worked on residential interiors, freestanding buildings, stores and exhibition designs, and as Simone mentioned, in the map, you can find some artworks that he has highlighted across the fair, so let him be your tour guide. His work has been featured in all sorts of publications, but most recently on the covers of Elle Decor and Architectural Digest. To dive into it, really quick introduction. As Simone mentioned, we're talking about the current state of connoisseurship, which I think for many people, I've mentioned this to people, we're doing this, and some people roll their eyes, they scratch their head. It does feel like an old word in some ways, but I think has a real vital importance today. The word connoisseur goes back, it comes to us about 300 years ago, early 1700s, from an obsolete French word meaning to know, which I think is sort of funny. There's a little bit of an irony in that connoisseurship, it is knowing, but it also comes with it a measure of taste. There's a measure of subjectiveness to it. In 1920s Europe, Bernard Berenson was trying to convince people, and I'm bringing up Berenson because I think of him, of course, as like the connoisseur, right? The gentleman wandering through old picture galleries trying to discern quality. And he wrote of his Titian recommendation, "My proofs, they are in my own head and cannot easily go into words, for they come from that sixth sense, the result of 50 years' experience whose promptings are incommunicable." So there's a very old school sense of connoisseurship. Today, of course, I think that word is very contested. There was a quote from Lawrence Cantor, the chief curator at the Yale Art Gallery, speaking to the New York Times about 10 years ago, who called the word connoisseur an elitist, dirty word, artificial, subjective, and mostly imaginary. And yet, today, as we wander around Tafaf and we see just this incredible variety of art out there, from antiquities to bracingly new contemporary art, and as we think about our canons being expanded to incorporate all sorts of histories that would have been neglected previously, we really need connoisseurs, I think. We need guides who understand quality, who have that expertise, but also that judgment. And so I'm excited to see where we delve into here. The first question I would throw out to the group is how they think about the word connoisseur and what it means for their practice today. Well, sorry.
Well, I think we're all, I'll jump in, but I think we're all hesitating because, I'll start by speaking for myself, is I have not thought of that word until this panel. I didn't roll my eyes, but I just thought it was an interesting topic to propose I haven't thought about what a connoisseur is in relationship to my practice, at least by the etymology of the word, where it comes from and what it was intended to encapsulate. I feel like it's antiquated enough that maybe it doesn't apply in how I view or how I interact with people who are interested in fine art or looking at the same things I am. I wouldn't call myself a connoisseur. And maybe that's an interesting reflection. If I'm not a connoisseur of something that I am crafting and practicing every day for over a decade, then who would I deem a connoisseur?
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I personally would think of you as a connoisseur.
Oh,
someone who's really in the trenches. I think all three people on the stage. But I mean, Eleanor or Ebony, are there collectors you think of as connoisseurs today? Or
I definitely think about that word probably more than you do. And I do think it has something to do with collections in a different way maybe than it does apply to a program at a gallery.
Yeah.
And I do think it has something to do with cultivating this, this knowledge and reading and trying to, like you said, to be in the know. And yeah, there are a lot of collectors I think of as connoisseurs for sure.
And what defines them? What are the aspects of what they do?
The process of collecting doesn't come spontaneously. It's a very thought out, strategic endeavor for them. And I think, you do see it more in the older generation. And we talk a lot in my office about is connoisseurship dead, and I don't think it is. That would be my answer after kind of thinking about it for a long time. You see these people who, scour the auctions and are looking for this very specific thing, and, they know exactly what they're looking for, and they don't compromise until they find that one. It's a slow process, I think.
Yes.
And I admire it for sure.
Yeah, I think you're homing in on. I mean, there are great questions that we can lead on from there to unpack. But yeah, it's this idea of slowness. I think this kind of discernment and its quality apart from maybe monetary value. It sounds like just I think scouring the auctions. I think of dealers. Advisors that just love trawling through the regional auction houses and they have alerts set. I mean, Adam, for you, you're coming at this often from designing spaces, creating places for people to live in. So you're looking at not just art, furniture, and so forth. Where does connoisseurship fall for you? What does it mean for you?
I guess I think of it, and not in the most perfectly sort of historically correct term, but in a more broad sense as someone's eye. And this is really the wrong way to think about connoisseurship in a historical sense, but I do think of it as, I think of a connoisseur, at least, as somebody that is able to blend historical knowledge, a lot of time spent studying, an understanding of context, an understanding of the subjectivity of their point of view. I think, and an embrace and a confidence in that point of view. And this is my personal definition of it, but I feel that I'm oftentimes working for people that, bring that spark or that spirit to our conversations around what they want to live with. And it can be extremely enriching for me because they can teach me things and show me certain pathways to understanding, or maybe certain pathways to having a literacy around a certain subject matter that can mean that I can see that subject matter, more clearly. I can read it. I can understand it. And so I think of it as that kind of deep understanding of something. And it can open your eyes, you can see something that you wouldn't have seen before when a connoisseur, I guess, can show it to you in the right way. So
Use a name, but could you give an example of what that's looked like for you? Have you learned from a kind of client about a specific field or?
Yes, yeah. Actually, my really a very early project. It was not a complete project, really. I was coming in as somebody kind of to help this person that had, they were much older than I was, and they had really made an amazing house and an amazing collection of art and furniture, but there were missing pieces and their taste had evolved, and so certain things that they had bought in the 80s they didn't love so much anymore, etc. And anyways, I helped them to kind of find a few pieces that we could sort of insert into what was already there. And they were really obsessed with, this is like a very classic example of a type of connoisseur, but they were really obsessed with French Art Deco. And it took me down a whole path that I only understood in a very cursory way. And I began to learn about the marks of certain makers and the particular hand that certain people had, sort of graced these objects with. And I began to learn about different collectors and the sort of provenances of these things, and sort of to construct a whole understanding of why this thing was interesting, why it was really interesting, something that I would have liked and I would have maybe thought, oh, that's very beautiful, something is going on there, there's some sort of aura to it, it is, obviously something special. But then once I knew all about it, I was like, totally melted by the knowledge, because it just made it so much richer. It was like I could see it all of a sudden. Something that was blurry and interesting but blurry became clear. And yeah, so I guess that was like a big learning moment.
Can I just share a reflection? Because I haven't thought about this word until preparing or thinking about the context for this talk. And does it, perhaps the oddness of the word for some is that the things that define what a connoisseur is, I completely can relate to, but the context of this connoisseur with fine art is particularly about, there's a class level to it and there's money involved, because somebody could be as knowledgeable about, anime or sneakers or, a particular music genre, and may not be or recognize the word connoisseurship. It's really associated, or I think used and applied with somebody who wants to, use the word confidence, which I thought was an interesting descriptor for it too, like maybe a confident person, maybe dangerously confident, coupled with an ego, which can be good and bad. But there's a bit of projection and display, I think, with connoisseurship. I'm not saying it's wrong, but I think that's where maybe some of us have more experience thinking about it than others.
No, I think it's such a fascinating point. And this New York Times article I was alluding to earlier talked along the lines of what you were saying was, in the broader culture, it seems like there has been a sort of embrace of connoisseurship. People who just know so much about anime. Some artists I know who can go deep into these graphic novels, like beer, chocolate, things that are somewhat approachable. And then at the same time, in the art world, there has been this sort of crisis around the word, or just lack of interest in it. And Eleanor, you were alluding to the sort of death of connoisseurship, and to put you on the spot, can you talk about that a little bit more, about what you think sort of driving that? And
I think it's a generational thing. I think, I do think it requires time to become an expert on certain things, and people are just more rushed now. They don't go as deep into things. I think it's a very good point that both of you guys bring up about the confidence and about the class thing, because I do think we were saying even before we talked about the idea of the hype beasts, who are, they're connoisseurs. What they're collecting might not interest anyone on this stage, but there's a very large cohort of people who are interested in learning everything they can about sports memorabilia or sneakers or toys. There's a huge, I think,
like other kinds of collectors.
Other kinds of collectors. Millennials,
yeah.
I think, are collecting things in a lot of ways. But when I talk about the death of connoisseurship, I think it's that slow-paced and the hunt and this expert, this sort of, it's a different. I think the pace has changed, but I do. So that's why we ask: is it dead? It's there. It's just different.
Yeah.
There's also a difference in the collector. You kind of mentioned too, right? Like the newer generation, if you are truly a collector of something, it is more than one, right? So if you traditionally, or I think how I came into it earlier, if you collect an artist, you are perhaps working to become a connoisseur or are moving in that direction with that artist. You look for more than one piece. You are collecting. You want to have 5 paintings by that artist or a few pieces of furniture by the same, craftsman or a few like you are collecting. And I think that has changed just in my short, 12-something years. But, every once in a while I do, like I shared an artwork with a client thinking it was of their taste. And they said, I love that artist, but I don't collect them. So there was no benefit for him to buy one, even though it was a strong work. But that feels rare.
That's interesting.
That's really interesting.
That's kind of thoughtful in a way.
Right, people don't collect, what is a true collector? It's not just someone who comes and maybe buys one.
Yeah, well, it reminds me of a conversation I was having with an art advisor at Frieze who was saying something that's really hurt the collecting field. This person was saying is that art's obviously gotten very expensive. Access to great work has gotten very expensive. And so this model you're talking about, I always think about someone like Roy Neuberger, who bought, 80 Milton Averys or something, was obsessed, knew it inside and out. You sort of, for many artists, just can't do that nowadays.
I was going to say that. I think it's price prohibitive in a lot of ways. It's really hard to go in depth on things because the prices go up so quickly. And it's hard to support an artist over even a decade,
Right. You can buy early on, maybe a few pictures, and then you get priced out.
But you can look at historical art that you still can do it with.
That's why I feel like it's an older thing. Yeah.
There's less of it maybe than there was in Barrington's time certainly to buy, but I think that there is something that's definitely shifted in terms of people's kind of appetite for this sort of repetitive consumption, which makes what I think of as these kind of great collectors, these sort of mysterious people that hoard lots of one thing. But that may have to do with a kind of broader appreciation for the subjectivity of art history and kind of like a more kind of a less linear appreciation for how something becomes valuable and what that value can mean. I think the transparency around art markets and sort of how value is created is such that it doesn't quite match, I think, this extreme collector appetite the way maybe it might have in another time, another generation. Or I feel that I see exactly what you're saying with my clients that I work with, that they're not interested in having an early, a mid, a late. They aren't really actually. They're happy to see something in a museum and then to have something here and something else that has something interesting to do with that. But it's a more dispersed kind of like network of thoughts.
By the way, I think the connoisseur is rare. I don't think every collector is a connoisseur. Maybe they don't even have to be. But there are these rare cases where I still think, it's a beautiful thing to see. When you there's I don't want to mention any names, but there are collectors who go so deep into a certain artist, and you just know that you're gonna go. You go visit them, you just see like. There's one in the city who was always like collecting Tasumi Kudo, you know, and just had like all these great examples, and you know, it's such a treat to be able to speak to him about the work and to see it there.
And that's good. It's interesting. Like, it's just, this is such a subjective meter of connoisseurship too, right? I mean, if somebody is a connoisseur of something, who is deeming that that is the correct art to be a connoisseur of? And this is really just a reflection. Like, I mean, you know, we know that there is, you know, this 1% of the 1% informing what is priced and on the walls and at auction.
It used to be the museums that would be
It used to be
doing that,
museums,
but it's
I
not,
mean, they're still in
unfortunately,
it, but
it's not the case,
it shouldn't, I would hope that this conversation, as a disclaimer, wouldn't dissuade anyone from feeling that they couldn't be a connoisseur of something that is not in something like an art fair here, you know what I mean? Like, there are connoisseurship of fine art, whose fine art. Basically what I'm saying is there's clearly a register of what we're saying a connoisseur is in this context. And very few people are able to be part of that conversation. And even fewer people are the ones who decide who can be part of that conversation. Yeah. So it seems like it's just a super reduced individual.
No, I think it's a great point. I mean, I wonder if maybe we can even just decide to like blow it up a little bit, expand it. And I just feel like, yeah, like you don't even necessarily need to own to be a connoisseur. Oh, yeah. I'd like to believe.
Yeah,
I believe.
I think that's true. Like to have conversations
Curators.
with people. Yeah.
Yes, if you know the history, if you just spend time in those like musty galleries.
You know, I'm gonna entertain the audience for a minute with a story of a time when I first met Andrew, and I was working at a small gallery on 27th Street. And I was very new. I had just come to New York. It was my first job at a gallery. I would also say I was completely new to the art world in general. I hadn't even stepped into an art gallery before. And New York art world specifically, and I'll just use this example, like painting specifically, is just really the world for connoisseurs, right? This is where they really know what they're talking about. And I think I have imposter syndrome forever because I could just never keep up with the conversation. I mean, people would come into the front desk and say, oh, to your point, they would drop a note about an art historical reference to draw a connection to this painting they just saw and craft a dialogue and a narrative about this artist and the painting. I gave myself a bit of room because I didn't know who they were talking about, but I would write it down and try and figure it out and started. But then the list just got so long of what I had no reference for and didn't know. And then it just felt like, well, I'm never going to, I'll never be able to say I can fully have a grasp on, abstract painting from these particular decades because maybe I'm not as interested in it as somebody else. But then is that okay that I'm not? And only now do I feel fully fine not caring. Like I know what I like and I know why. So maybe in that sense I'm a connoisseur and that I know exactly what I want to talk about and why. But there is a bit of a kind of, or maybe I felt in the time, and I think this is probably felt by others, that you are not in the connoisseurship club if you're not able to speak about something in a particular way or appreciate the route with which you should have come to that conclusion and use particular references that feel canonical and referent for the majority of people who have studied it. But it took a long time before I felt comfortable saying I don't know who you're talking about.
I still struggle with that.
Yeah.
I pretend a lot.
Yeah, I mean, fake it till you make it.
Yeah,
right?
actually, fake it all the time.
No, and yeah, I feel that way about abstract
Everybody
painting.
feels that. You're not the only person, and nobody can know everything. And I think connoisseurs do zone in on their thing and become
that's that
experts on their
thing,
thing.
right?
Yeah.
They're so confident that they make you feel.
I like the embrace and the confidence,
never gonna
like
know
you
this
said.
much.
Yeah.
I'll be like, why do I care about Pollock?
I don't either.
I mean, I appreciate the auction record, but I'm not. Everyone in here should love it if they do. But I mean, it's okay if you don't.
But
I agree.
there is a blinders thing. Like the connoisseurs that I'm thinking of, that I know, the connoisseurs, they are like fixated on a very specific area of whatever it is. And, you know, sometimes it's really annoying, like you're saying. Sometimes it's like so amazing because they're such a nut for this weird thing, this one particular painter that no one's ever heard of, and they have everything, or they are obsessed with this particular type of textile, and you can't even do anything with it. It's like in drawers, and they're crazy for it, and they know everything about it. I mean, and it can be like so infectious and amazing, and you leave and you're like, oh my God, now I'm obsessed with this random, useless, you know, scrap of fabric that I need to learn everything about. But this kind of blinders, sort of for one specific thing, it's very unusual. I don't know if that was more common in like other times, but I do feel that now there's just so much information available. Like if you want to be a connoisseur about something, it's like never been easier to go out and find out everything you want about something.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and maybe it's circling back to what Eleanor, you were saying. I mean, I always think about being in college or even high school, sort of like early internet days, and being into like, you know, noise music or something, and you'd like trawl the internet and you'd be like, oh, the Japanese release has 2 more minutes, and you'd get so deep in these things. And now it's sort of like, it's all there on YouTube. I sort of know it's there. I mean, my tastes have changed, of course, but I wonder, yeah, there are reasons to be...
I think taste is a big part of it,
taste,
like you said,
yeah.
Which I think, you know, I think, you know, it's all out there and you can become an expert. You can know things, but I don't know if that means that you have the eye or it's really hard to explain what this is, but when you see it, you know. And it's it's style and taste, and it's a certain kind of expert in this thing that you're an expert in. And that's why I do think it's not necessarily like about noise music or anime. I do think of the word connoisseur more in terms of collecting than I do. We were saying anyone can be a connoisseur, it's true, but because that's just the way we've seen it. A curator at a museum can do it too, because they're building a collection, and it's a different way. But
it's about bringing something to the fore also, maybe, that's undervalued, so less of just an obsessive... I mean, I think about someone like Mitchell Elgas, who like, you go into that gallery, you just know he's trawled through like the darkest corners of archives and auction houses, and you're like, what is this thing? And often I find, this is a former artist and dealer on the Lower East Side, oftentimes I find what he shows like kind of appalling, and like I'm not into it at all, but I know this is someone who it's his eye. And so maybe that's something that's changed too. We've gone through a very like unipolar model of Berenson, right? Is this a Titian? Is this not a Titian? Should you buy it for 100,000 or whatever? To this more individualized thing. Maybe that's a democratizing aspect, positive aspect.
I hope so.
I mean, it should. I think that's the more exciting place, like evolution of it, really, and it's great for that kind of dissonance for us to talk about things, right? Like, shouldn't we? I mean, uniformly, should we be agreeing that Titian is this rigid thing versus this person? I mean, I'll use a curator as an example, but there's no, well, I have never seen, nor do I feel aligned with a general, like a constant or uniform curatorial style, right? Like there would be, in terms of taste or what I see as tasteful or what I feel is a successful exhibition design, there's another curator who could do the same a show with the same artist, and I think it's horrendous. And then there's a connoisseurship there. Like you need to kind of study who you would want to work with, and do you like their style? Like you're kind of picking lanes.
Oh, for sure. There's a lot of those decisions to be made.
Well, yeah, I mean, Evan, even to put you on the spot, I mean, you curated the recent Raymond Saunders show at Zorner and Andrew Krebs. And I wonder, I mean, approaching that, did you kind of, I would argue was a role of connoisseurship, probably, in putting that together. I mean, how did you think about your role in that in terms of defining quality and...
Thank you. It's an interesting question to answer because I don't know that I have something super interesting to offer. Like it feels like it's just like an instinct. You know, I just follow my own taste.
Yeah, that's the word.
You know,
yeah.
I know what I like. I know what I hope people enjoy looking at. Of course, in this instance, it was the largest group of Saunders works ever exhibited in New York, so I felt a bit of pressure. I wanted to make sure it was a solid presentation that gave a great overview of the practice. But I mean, for a little insight, I was in storage units for days in Los Angeles. I saw over 150 things, narrowed it down to about 75, and then narrowed that down even more. So there is a process, but I mean, you saw my top picks. That's really it. It's like, that feels good there. No, I don't really like that.
Yeah. I mean, thinking about it, we keep kind of circling around to, there is this decline, but we also enjoy seeing the connoisseur when they arise. I wonder, this decline, Ebony, you've homed in on these class issues around it. I mean, it's sort of great that we're no longer beholden. It is great that we're no longer beholden to these things. Is there any loss? Do we need connoisseurs? I mean, what role do they serve in this art industry, in this broader art decorative, architectural world?
Yes, we need
Yeah.
The one dude that I talked to said, like, in 20 years, like, she's like, you think this word is crazy now? In 20 years, no one's going to use it.
Well, I just think maybe not, I was going to say not the word.
Right,
I think
but
we need these
yes,
people.
right.
you
So,
know?
maybe we should even just set aside
I mean, it's
the word.
great for artists that people who are experts in their work.
Yes,
who
we
know
need
how to-
that.
Yeah, I mean, and who can present them in different ways and interesting ways. I mean, they're basically fans or nerds. I mean, there's
Yes.
other words you can use.
Yes.
But I see your problem with the word.
Yeah.
I
And
see it, but
it's very exciting to meet somebody that's gone super deep into something that you're interested in. You know, like you're on the outside, you're just interested in it, but they know, you know, and it's. But you know, I don't necessarily conflate the connoisseur, this idea of the connoisseur, with, you know, maybe even knowing like what's a nice one or a not nice. It's more like this kind of I don't know. I guess I was thinking about it as I was thinking about this talk, is like someone's particular eye, their focus, their way of reading something, their way of understanding something, and being able to cut through, you know, a lot of distracting factors and understand something about that thing, you know, which like certainly you can do, and it is from looking and learning and studying. This idea that there's like a mystical component to it, I don't know, unless the mystical component is just how could somebody be so fixated on one thing, but it's just this like weird, you know, amazing
Nerd.
Yeah. You know, and it's
nerd.
cool. And
what's the difference to you between a connoisseur and an expert? Because I think they're kind of different things in a way, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Why is that?
Can you tease that out? Yeah, that's interesting.
I do think that, again, it's about, like you said, it's a personal way of looking at it. The connoisseur brings something different to the table than just an expert, I think. And yeah, it's the way that they go about kind of living with these things and amassing them and caring for them and presenting them over and over again. But I don't know, do you think a connoisseur and an expert are the same thing?
I think it's really tough. I see the overlap. I guess I do see this, and there is this kind of negative quality to it. With the connoisseur, there is this element of like authority. There's this element of sort of pushing, which I actually, as a writer, identify with to some degree in a positive way, hopefully, which is like the role of the critic, the role of the journalist is to, Roberta Smith always says, it's to like get people through the doors. It's to get people to go see this art you love, which I think hopefully the connoisseur does as well.
It's inspiring.
Yeah, but I really am coming around to like, oh God, just toss the work because it's distracting. But yes, and whereas like the nerd also would, it's the discernment I guess I would come back to too. Like the nerd is like the nerd expert is just, whoa, they can tell you 4,000 facts about like Florian Stettheimer or me.
Yeah.
But like the discerning connoisseur would say like, oh, well, like this is the best picture. This is, you know, the framework in which we can see it among 5 other artists.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, if, like, for Ebony, you as an art dealer, Eleanor, you as an art advisor, I mean, do you feel the need to, like, setting aside the word connoisseur, experts, are you trying to kind of create them? Do you try to, like, you know, entice your clients to delve deep like that? Does it matter to you if they become that way about the art?
They might not need me if they become an expert.
Well, that's right. They need, yeah.
I don't know. It's a good question. I don't think everybody has the capacity to care that much. I think when you find people that do care, it's really fun to help them get on their own road. But I don't think it's not a priority for everybody.
Not everyone wants to be, yeah.
Some people just want some nice things to live with, and they're good, you know. It's a different kind of obsession that not everybody has.
Yeah.
Maybe not everyone needs, you know. A lot of people, there's like a mainstream taste for a reason.
Yeah.
Because it's like most people like these things, and I feel a connoisseur is just a little bit to the side of that, you know.
Yeah, kind of poking or prodding.
Yeah, looking for things that are a little under the radar, less popular.
Yeah.
You know, and bringing that. How would?
That makes sense, Eleanor. I think I like. I feel very privileged to, I would say now the majority of the time, I show, you know, curate, and then subsequently sell work that, in this instance, we're talking today, in the last 3 years, I have commissioned. I am working with an artist, so I am deeply invested, which makes my enthusiasm, it's shifted from 12 years ago when I felt the need to first study about an artist that I was told to sell or curate. So I think now I hope that anybody who's coming to the space or wants me to share work that I'm excited about, they're going to feel my excitement. So if they're interested, for me as the nerd, I'm really excited. I'm like, oh great, you're gonna love it. It's like, let me come, you gotta meet the artist. Like, I want to do all of that every single time. But I don't think I'd expect them, nor am I asking of them to go down this road with me, with this artist indefinitely into perpetuity. Like, I would hope they continue to follow. I would hope they become a true collector. But I'm really just excited about this moment of introducing or maybe reintroducing. Yeah.
Totally. I think that might be the perfect kind of optimistic but clear-eyed note to end on. If you can join me in thanking Eleanor, Ebony, and Adam with a round of applause, and then we'll do questions.